appreciate it. So I will be talking to you today about the culture of innovation. But before I get there, I wanted to walk a little bit into my background. And I actually started off as an entrepreneur. I started off an entrepreneur not in financial services, but rather in a hardcore tech company. So we had a data visualization platform that made it easy to digest large amounts of content. And our technology started getting a lot of traction in a variety of markets, including, as Hisham mentioned, the London Olympics was a client of ours, the NFL was a client of ours, as well as a Super Bowl. And a handful of media publications, from The Economist to Entertainment Weekly to The Guardian, a ton of publications in Russia and Philippines, as it was a language-independent technology. I saw the impact and importance of the startup mentality and the startup culture of moving quickly, iterating on the dime, and the impact that that could have, and thought that tech was my world. I then had the opportunity, BBVA, one of the largest banks in the world with nearly $1 trillion in assets based out of Spain, the largest bank in Spanish-speaking Latin America, had reached out to us and said, "We love your technology, you should apply for our startup competition." So we applied, we became a finalist. I went down to Mexico. We did not win, but I got to know the bank very well, and I was fascinated by their strategy, their vision, and they had talked about, the chairman, he was CEO at the time, became chairman, said, "We are a technology company." And he'd been saying that over 10 years before many of the other financial institutions were using that language. And he said, "Scarlett, we really want to have you join our team. We know you have no banking experience, but we want to think about the future of banking. And if we have the same people who have always been there, then it's going to be hard for us to be the vision and the future of banking." And as such, I joined, and we had a variety of incredible assets and opportunities. We made a handful, 6+ digital acquisitions of startups while I was there. Everything from a design studio to a digital neo-only bank called Simple, which is focused directly on millennials. And we also were incubating startups in-house. I then moved on and was Chief Innovation Officer of a public bank out on the West Coast of the United States called Opus. And then I was also the VP and Head of Business Development for USAA. So for those of you who are familiar with Net Promoter Score, USAA was #1 in the country for Net Promoter Score, meaning their customers loved them. They loved that experience. #2 for Net Promoter Score was actually that neobank Simple that BBVA acquired. So I've had the experience of working for the top 2 highest Net Promoter Scores in the entire country of the United States. One thing that I've seen in all of these different roles, as well as by speaking with my peers and other people that I know well, is that there's a lot of challenges to innovation. Legacy infrastructure, lack of resources, but I have found fundamentally the biggest impediment for success goes back to culture. So what is culture exactly? Culture is what encompasses the values and behaviors that makes your organization unique. It really is about the people, and it's really about making sure that it needs to be nurtured. It's not something that we say tomorrow we're a digital bank and then everyone follows suit. It has to be embedded and ingrained into your DNA, and something that not only the executive team and the board, but levels down as well, believe and can see on a consistent basis. Even if you have the right infrastructure, even if you have the right resources, I will say to you, which is a little bit of an aggressive statement, that if the culture is not in place, I still do not believe the company will be successful in the long run. So this is a survey done by KPMG and a group called Innovation Leader from 2018. They interviewed over 270 senior executives, SVP, EVP, C-suite, from a variety of organizations. I pulled out the data to only look at financial institutions. So you have the largest financial institutions and as small as 1,000 people. #2, and by the way, people were allowed to answer more than one, which is why those numbers don't equal 100. #2 thing is cultural issues. #1, political turf wars, which, by the way, I actually attribute back to cultural issues. So there's something very, very strong here in that culture truly has to define what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I propose, The other thing is innovation is a very broad statement. It can mean a lot of different things depending on what you're talking about. In the United States, as an example, we have over 5,000 financial institutions. A lot of them say that they're innovative, but when you actually dive a level deeper, it's pretty basic innovation, doing small changes and small things. And to this definition, they're right. But innovation is much, much more than that. So what does it mean and what does it take to create an innovative culture? It starts, of course, with the executive team and the board. I've seen oftentimes, whether it be publicly in newspapers, on the press or elsewhere, where a CEO will say, we believe in innovation, we're supporting innovation, this is our mission. It's a lot more than that. It's something that happens behind closed doors, where when innovation is its own line of business, they may not always be in the room. Who is in that room fighting for them? Who is in that room ensuring that their objectives are being made? Innovation, especially transformational innovation, the things that will transform financial services moving forward, things like what Amazon did. Amazon started by selling books. Now their highest revenue generator is AWS, Amazon Web Services. That's an entirely different business model than what they were originally doing. For true transformation, this is not a short-term process. It's something that takes years even to establish. And so you need the right people at the executive level to be there and support that mission. You also need to make sure that you have a clearly agreed upon expectations. What does innovation mean to us? For smaller institutions, maybe it is starting with that incremental innovation. Maybe it is baby steps, and that's okay too. Everyone needs to start somewhere. But as long as you have a vision of what are short-term goals, what are long-term goals. And of course, one thing that has been challenging, especially in financial institutions, is the last point around the positives outcomes of failure. Now, I actually have a statement that's used often now, which is not about, the startup world talks a lot about failing fast. But really, the way that I like to think about it, and in a world like ours that is so highly regulated, words really matter. Instead of fail fast, it's experiment cheaply. How can we test and iterate in small versions to then have those things, whether or not they're successful? Of course we want them to be successful, but in fact many of them won't. So how can we take those learnings to better have a response to what we're going to do in the future? Now our teams didn't spend all of this time deploying products that weren't even going to work in market. This is one of the things that I use when I talk to executive teams, both with the organizations that I've worked with and then more broadly in the industry. But going back to what does that mean to us? And really, why are we doing this? We live in a world where competition is fierce, and oftentimes you see the Me Too movement in the sense that, well, this bank is doing this bank has this type of mobile application, so therefore we must. Are you only doing these things in response to the industry, or are you taking a proactive approach and wanting to be one of the first? And what does this look like? How are we envision this being structured? The most important thing I would argue is how are we measuring it? And so I will leave you at the end because it's something that I have banged my head against the wall with for years, both with myself and my peers on how are we proving value? How are we proving ROI when innovation does usually not have, especially initially, a direct impact on the P&L? So I'll hopefully help you and give you some tips with that at the end. But then also, what does commitment look like? I have seen time and time again organizations, big, small, medium, indifferent, where they say they hire a chief innovation officer, but that person has no support system. They don't have a head count, they don't have a budget, there's not support from the line of businesses, because in most cases, this type of innovation, your clients are, of course, always your end clients, your consumers, your small businesses, whoever else you have as your client base. But as an innovation team, your clients are actually your line of business leaders, and so they need to be on board. They need to be on the same train of thought as you are. Here's a type of people. Of course, the CEO is the one that we're all very well aware of that needs to be aligned. I would also argue that the chief financial officer is equally as important. That person is important because they control and they know all of the money. So that person, and I've seen this happen more and more, especially in the United States, but definitely in Europe and Latin America for sure as well, where CFOs are very involved in the innovation process. They're there helping to understand and articulate the value of innovation, what that means in the first year, what that means in the next 5 years. Technology, not surprising. We talked a little about legacy systems. The other one that people tend to be surprised by is the chief human resource officer. One trend, especially in the big five, is that a lot of innovation initiatives are actually being reported into the chief human resource officer. Now, that seems a little bit odd initially, and I think there's a few reasons for that. One, like I said, innovation is not something that's going to be showing revenue right away. HR typically is not a revenue generator, and so there's opportunities there to basically house them until they do start making money. But two, you have to go back to the psychology of people and what incentivizes them, what gets them excited. Money is one of those things. We all are beholden to KPIs and year-end reviews. And the other part is recognition and rewards and things like that, right? So if you go back to the KPI piece, if you're working closely with the HR team, you can start to identify and strategize around how are we measuring innovation, not only within this siloed team of innovation, but throughout the organization as a whole. What does that actually look like? You can do things like, how many new products did you test this year? How many startups did you talk to? What is the last time we had a new product in market? All of these types of things, which will directly influence their bonus structure, you're going to get them to move in a way that just talking about innovation simply cannot. The other piece is not only the executive team and the board and the head of line of business, but it's usually one or two levels down. So I will tell you firsthand that this has happened to me. I had the CEO in every one of these cases being a big advocate and supporter for the initiatives that I was pushing, and it was known company-wide that he was a big believer in all of these things. And so as that, throughout the line of business leaders, they said, yes, we're doing this. The problem that I found, though, is all of the doers of the organization are so busy with a variety of things coming their ways that Scarlett's innovation project or Bank's innovation project could be priority number 3 or 33. It's going to happen either way, but one maybe in a few months, the other one maybe in 18 months. And so it's equally important to spend time with the doers and the one who are actually the movers and shakers in the organization. The leadership team often is too far away from the day-to-day to actually see those impacts. So spending time with these people, understanding where there's challenges, understanding where there's issues, and how you can help them make their job easier and have them look good in front of their boss is actually extremely important. One other thing that started to happen a lot in financial services, so being in corporate now, who I still refer to myself as a recovering entrepreneur, we have a lot of meetings. We have meetings on meetings about meetings and committees, and so I certainly am a little bit hesitant to recommend yet another committee, but as such, I think this is very powerful. Oftentimes, in any organization, we have so much going on, we get consumed with what's happening internally. And so I think an innovation committee is a way not only to keep organizations internally, the different lines of business and whomever else, aligned. By the way, I think it's imperative that the CEO is part of this. They are the leader of the organization after all. So on a consistent basis, you're on the same page, you're having the same agenda, and what has progress been in this quarter versus that quarter. But some of the bigger banks are also bringing in external people as part of these committees, because then you're not getting groupthink, you're not getting people who are very focused on their specific area within the line of business, but they're people who are completely outside of the businesses, maybe entrepreneurs, maybe venture capitalists, whatever it is, retired CEOs, you name it. But it's different perspectives, but their whole focus is around how are we building for the future of X. Now, this is the same survey, but the opposite. So what have you found the most enabling as it relates to innovation? Leadership support is number one. And of course, the ability to test and learn. The other thing that people come up with a lot is around the right team and right employees. I really admire BBVA for the idea that they were hiring, and it was not just me, there was a handful of others, people with zero banking experience at executive level, to really rethink what it means to be a bank, to really rethink what that relationship with our customer looks like in a way that's not traditional. And you see now, and we'll talk a little bit about this on our panel later, but a lot of the organizations are looking at millennials and the next and upcoming generations. But oftentimes, those people are lacking from the leadership level. So if you don't have people who you're trying to target, be there on the day-to-day to talk about this will work or this won't work and here's why, you're missing an opportunity. So now looking back at innovation team, what type of things do you need to consider? There's a lot. It goes back to, what does it even mean to have an innovation team? Do you want a big team? Do you want a small team? But really, are you set up from an organizational and structure perspective to make this happen? What does that actually look like? One of the challenges that I've seen many times is you have the executive buy-in now, you have the resources, you have the headcount yourself, and then you have a startup, most likely a fintech, not only a fintech, and you see the business opportunity, that makes sense. They start going through the process. Procurement, risk, procurement, risk, and legal can be quite challenging, and they can be stuck in that for 18 months, if not more. How are you going to help mitigate that process? What is that actually going to look like? A lot of the bigger organizations are doing fast tracks. So most of these startups don't have 5 years plus of relevant and historical data. How are you making it possible to still work with the next generation of fintech in a way that's it makes sense for you and for them? Because startups, their most valuable resource is time, right? And of course, going back to the talent piece. And there's a lot on training too. So even from day one, when you're hiring new people into your organization, of course it's much more challenging to change people who have been there for a long time. People don't like change, but all of us are continuing to hire new people. When they're being onboarded, how are you talking to them about your story? How are you talking to them about your vision? What does innovation look like for you? How are you making sure that they feel empowered and excited about innovation the day that they get to the organization? So this is another stat that I would hope you'd find interesting. Back to the same study that we talked about. Oftentimes people feel very overwhelmed when they want to start at a fast-paced innovation. The truth of the matter is it doesn't matter if you're a 1,000-person company or hundreds of thousands. Less than a third of financial institutions have less than 10 innovation employees. So it does not take a town. It takes a few dedicated people to really start the movement and then to grow from there. Here's another example. You see a lot, at least in the United States, I'm sure it's true here as well, I know I've seen it in Europe, that one of these large banks is spending X billion or Y billion plus on innovation. Oftentimes, a lot of that money is actually going to supporting existing infrastructure and not really on true new innovation or technology initiatives. This is the feedback that they gave when it was anonymous. So a lot of them are not even above 50 million in terms of real innovation initiatives. Now to the measurement part that I wanted to end with. I have spent, and my peers, I spent a lot of time talking about this. So I tried to come up with, and these are going to be text-heavy slides, so sorry in advance, but I wanted to make sure I equipped you with as much as I could. How do you actually measure that? So I'll start with what we care about because we're in banking, which is the financial. And this is certainly something to start with and think about. There's a lot of different ways as to what that looks like. Oftentimes, when you're talking about things like cost savings, this is much more basic innovation. You're finding more effective and efficient ways to streamline processes. And of course, R&D. So there's some interesting things there. Now, the non-financial is actually much more interesting to me. We talked a little bit about embedding it in yearly goals. We talked about alignment of customers, because that's one thing. We all say as financial institutions that our customers are our core and we're here for them. If you can align what you're doing on the digital transformation and innovation side directly with customers, and how are you impacting and changing their lives? How many of them are testing the new things you put in market from the innovation side? How has that impacted your net promoter score? How has your relationship with them in general changed for the better? How are they reacting to you? How is their brand affinity to you? All of these things can be very helpful. The other thing too is around R&D impact. Because if you go back here really quick, and I'm running out of time, but I want to get there, R&D impact is huge. So, USA, I mentioned, #1 net promoter score in the industry in the United States. There was an article that came out in Forbes in September 2018. So they have a really strong internal employee innovation program. Just to put it in perspective, headcount is around 33,000. So they have over 10,000 submissions from their employees every given year from their employee innovation program. Of that, 897 patents have been filed. This is their employees. This is not new people. This is people in their organization. 897 patents have been filed from their employees. So I think that's pretty exciting. And then this is the last slide, basically. Here's some other things that you can measure. Industry awards, press, partners. How have you been employed? Like, how has your talent changed? Were you getting this type of talent before, and now talent who would typically not go to a bank come there? Those are all ways to measure the impact and success of what you're doing. This is just a quote from a gentleman who's very well known in the United States, which is just, it's not about revenue. It's about growing the number of people who buy and stay on this, and how much are they buying and how long are they there. All right, we don't have time for questions. That's my information. If you have questions, feel free to find me afterwards, and I'm happy to discuss any of the below. And with that, we're all done.